Their marriage looked perfect from the outside, but in reality, it was really bad. Today, we delve into a chilling case that saw a groundbreaking turn due to a psychological exhumation conducted 4 years after the events unfolded. A psychological profile involves an in-depth analysis of an individual's personality, including character traits, behavioral patterns, emotional state, intellectual abilities, self-esteem, and the underlying motivations for their actions. Experts usually create such profiles through interviews, psychological tests, observations, situational simulations, and even by analyzing social media activity. However, how do you construct a psychological profile for someone who has been deceased for years and gauge their emotional state right before their demise? Kristen Trickle's case stands out as a unique and complex one, often cited as the first instance of psychological exhumation in the annals of forensic history. This method was used to decipher the motives and mental state of a young woman who unexpectedly took her own life. Despite her outwardly joyful and devout demeanor and her ambitious plans for the future, no one could fathom why Kristen would choose to end her life so abruptly without any clear reason. The initial findings by the forensic pathologist supported the prevailing theory of the case, but it was an astute psychologist who eventually brought the truth to light. The main challenge lay in the passage of time since Kristen's tragic death. Despite several years having elapsed, this did not hinder the successful conviction of the perpetrator, who believed he had escaped justice. The tragic love story of Kristen and Colby Trickle begins with Kristen Trickle Narise's early life. Born on August 14, 1993, in a quaint town in southeastern Nebraska, Kristen's childhood was anything but idyllic. Her biological mother abandoned the family for another man when Kristen was barely 3, moving to California and severing all ties with her daughter. Raised single-handedly by her father, James, Kristen was well cared for as her father strove to provide her with everything she needed. Unfortunately, James battled a severe illness that progressively worsened over the years. When Kristen was just 16, her father succumbed to his illness, leaving her without any close relatives. At this point, Kristen faced the grim possibility of being sent to a shelter until she reached adulthood. At that critical juncture, Kristen's paternal aunt and uncle from Kansas came forward. Despite already parenting 3 children, the couple did not hesitate to welcome their orphaned niece into their home, committed to providing her a life filled with comfort and happiness. Upon moving in with her relatives, Kristen seamlessly blended into her new family environment. Her aunt and uncle embraced her as their own, enveloping her in a warm atmosphere of love and care. Kristen thrived academically, engaged in art studio classes, assisted with household chores, and harbored dreams of becoming a veterinarian, driven by her profound love for animals. Her relatives and friends often spoke of her as being empathetic, kind-hearted, approachable, and exceptionally sweet. Kristen was known for her resilience and determination in achieving her goals, consistently inspiring those around her with her infectious optimism. The Rice family, devout in their faith, were regular attendees at their local church. It was here, at the age of 18, that Kristen's path crossed with Colby, a fellow churchgoer. Colby, an ambitious musician, often played his guitar during church services as part of a band. Also 18, he was not only talented but also dreamt of a significant career in music. The pair quickly struck up a friendship which blossomed into romance. Colby's musical talents extended to writing songs, many of which he composed for Kristen, winning her heart over with his lyrical dedications. Known for his sociability and charisma, Colby was the type to light up any gathering. After graduating high school, Colby's interest took a surprising turn towards the military. By 18, he had enlisted and begun his service in the U.S. Armed Forces, where over the next 3 years, he carved out a respectable military career. Despite the distance, he maintained constant communication with Kristen, fostering their bond through regular calls and letters. At 21, marking a pivotal moment, Colby transitioned to the reserves, returned home, and romantically proposed to Kristen, who joyously accepted. In April 2014, Kristen and Colby Trickle exchanged vows and began their married life in Hays, a small town in Kansas. There, Colby attempted to forge a music career post-college, though his efforts met with limited success. He frequently performed at local events and small gatherings, covering well-known songs. The couple, along with their 2 beloved dogs, seemed to embody marital bliss, according to many who knew them. However, their seemingly content life took a dark turn 5 years later. On the chilling morning of October 31st, 2019, a horrifying incident shattered their quiet existence. At around 4 a.m., emergency services received a frantic call from a man claiming to be Colby Trickle. He reported that his wife, Kristen, had tragically shot herself in the head with a revolver from their home collection. Responding swiftly, a medical team accompanied by police raced to the scene. Greeting them at the front door was Colby, who, despite the gravity of the situation, maintained a composed demeanor and remained outside as the authorities entered. Inside, the officers discovered a harrowing scene. Kristen lay on the bed, a pool of blood around her, with a large revolver resting on her abdomen and a visible gunshot wound to her chin. Initially presumed dead, she startlingly moved her hand, prompting an officer to detect a faint pulse and breathing. In a desperate bid to save her, Kristen was quickly repositioned on the floor for resuscitation efforts. Regrettably, her life slipped away before the ambulance's arrival, and the arriving medical team could only pronounce her dead. Outside, Sergeant Brandon Hauptman delivered the grave news to Colby, who, after repeatedly asking for confirmation, broke down in tears. However, his prior casual demeanor and conversation about video games with patrol officers cast doubt on the authenticity of his grief. At first glance, the tragedy seemed a clear case of suicide, yet the scene held certain anomalies that didn't escape the notice of seasoned detectives. Their trained eyes and instincts immediately hinted at the possibility of foul play, prompting a deeper investigation into the tragic end of Kristen's life. It was the eve of Halloween, a time Kristen had seemingly embraced with enthusiasm, as evidenced by the festive preparations scattered around their home. Handmade costume decorations adorned her bedroom vanity, while the kitchen table was festively laid out with a themed tablecloth and bowls filled with treats like lollipop bats, ghosts, and gummy worms. However, the manner in which her life ended cast a shadow over these cheerful preparations, presenting a stark and uncharacteristic contrast. The method chosen for her death raised several perplexing questions. Kristen was found nearly undressed, clad only in her underwear, a detail that seemed at odds with common expectations, as women often concern themselves with their appearance, even in death. Additionally, the use of a gunshot to the head was unusual. Such a method is less common among women due to the potential for disfigurement. The extent of the injury was so severe that Kristen had to be buried in a closed casket. Another significant anomaly was the choice of weapon, a revolver that was notably large and cumbersome, ill-suited to her petite frame. It would have been difficult for her to maneuver the weapon to shoot herself in the chin, and the position of the gun, lying sideways on her stomach, only added to the mystery. Her husband Colby explained that he had contemplated suicide after discovering her body, and had even placed the revolver to his temple before resolving to call for help instead. Amidst the ongoing police investigation, Kristen's mobile phone, which lay on the nightstand, rang with an alarm she had set, suggesting she had plans for the following morning. This indicated that her decision to end her life might have been a sudden one, contradicting the idea of premeditated suicide. These inconsistencies led detectives to suspect that the scene might have been meticulously staged. Colby, now a primary suspect, was summoned for questioning. Although he complied and went to the police station voluntarily, his composed and confident demeanor during the interrogation did little to alleviate the suspicions of law enforcement officials. Colby recounted the events of that fateful evening, explaining that Kristen had returned home from her job at Walmart, where she was a manager poised for a promotion to senior manager. They enjoyed a peaceful dinner together, followed by a session of video games. Feeling unwell, Colby retired early to bed, while Kristen stayed up to tidy the kitchen and arrange sweets for the upcoming holiday celebration. Later that night, Colby was jolted awake by a loud bang that left him disoriented, with ringing ears and enveloped in darkness. It was only after he managed to switch on the light that he discovered the tragic scene beside him. Kristen, motionless, with blood streaming from her head. In a state of panic, he attempted to revive her, but soon realized the effort was futile and grasped the nearby revolver. Colby's actions following the discovery of his wife's body raised questions. Typically, in such scenarios, one might attempt life-saving measures or at least try to stem the bleeding. However, Colby did not approach his wife again, claiming shock had immobilized him. While a police officer provided first aid before the arrival of medics, Colby was outside, engaging in casual conversation about music and video games with a patrol officer. Upon confirmation of Kristen's death, he displayed a brief moment of tears before swiftly regaining his composure. During his interrogation at the police station, Colby faced routine inquiries, including whether Kristen had any life insurance policies. He denied any such policies, but mentioned he was entitled to minor payouts from the armed forces due to his service. He also boasted about his intelligence background and involvement in special operations worldwide, although it later emerged that much of his military service tales were exaggerated or false. When pressed for a reason why Kristen might have taken her own life, Colby suggested that she had battled prolonged depression stemming from her troubled childhood and adolescence. His account painted a picture of a woman struggling with deep-seated emotional issues, a narrative that seemed to align conveniently with the circumstances of her death. These revelations only deepened the mystery surrounding Kristen's death, casting further doubt on Colby's narrative. The discrepancies between his actions and statements, along with the fabricated details of his military service, prompted investigators to scrutinize his story more closely, suspecting that there might be more to the tragedy than a simple case of suicide. Colby detailed the struggles that Kristen faced in her life, mentioning her mother's abandonment, her father's untimely death, and her subsequent move to live with an aunt and uncle she had barely known. He delivered these points with a calm and convincing demeanor. Yet, despite his poised presentation, experienced investigators were skeptical, sensing that his narrative might have been carefully prepared in advance. At that point, however, the police had no concrete evidence to hold him accountable, and with no charges to press against him, Colby was released. This decision came even as doubts lingered about the truthfulness of his statements. The news of the tragedy deeply affected Kristen's family. Her uncle, aunt, and siblings immediately made the 500-mile journey to Hays to engage with the police and start funeral preparations. The family was adamant that Kristen would not have taken her own life, citing her strong religious convictions, regular attendance at church services, and her belief that suicide was a sin. They portrayed Kristen as an optimist who loved life and had plans for the future. She had been actively pursuing her dream of opening a shelter for homeless animals, having already identified a suitable property with a large plot of land for a long-term lease. Detectives later confirmed her negotiations to rent this property. Furthermore, Kristen was looking forward to a promotion at work, a recognition she was proud of, and had made plans for Halloween and her sister's upcoming birthday in mid-November. Her family strongly refuted any claims of depression or mental health issues, emphasizing that Kristen had no harmful habits and was in good spirits. They highlighted her deep affection for her dogs, arguing that she would never leave them behind recklessly. A particularly poignant point made by her relatives concerned Colby's behavior. They described him as controlling and abusive, alleging that he dominated Kristen's social interactions, decided who she could communicate with, and would become enraged if she did not immediately answer his calls or messages. Kristen had even resorted to secretly calling her relatives due to his restrictions, and during her last visit, she confided her inability to endure such treatment any longer. She had discussed these issues with Colby, hinting at a possible separation if things did not improve, adding another layer of motive to the circumstances surrounding her death. Following the preliminary discussions with both Colby and Kristen's family, the detectives were convinced that the forensic examination would be crucial in uncovering the truth. The autopsy confirmed a single entry wound from a bullet on Kristen's chin, indicating that the shot was fired while she was lying on her back, with the gun barrel pressed tightly against her head. While it was physically possible for her to have inflicted the wound herself, the positioning would have been exceedingly difficult. In light of the family's depiction of Colby as a controlling tyrant, the detectives ordered a thorough examination of Kristen's body for any signs of previous physical abuse, such as bruises, scratches, or other injuries. This was based on the hypothesis that if Colby had been abusive, there might be residual marks of violence. However, the examination did not reveal any such injuries, presenting a significant setback in the investigation, as it showed no physical signs of struggle or resistance besides the fatal gunshot. The investigative focus then shifted to Colby's character, where it emerged that he had a propensity for deceit. He had constructed a facade of being involved in high-stakes intelligence missions and having a successful music career, but these claims were unfounded. In reality, Kristen was the primary earner in the household, diligently working at Walmart, while Colby earned only sporadically from his music, spending much of his time on leisure activities like video games. Colby's lack of consistency and dedication to his music career, coupled with his laziness, painted a picture of a man living in the shadow of his wife's success. As the investigation deepened, the police secured a warrant to examine the couple's electronic devices, revealing further insights. Kristen's phone calendar was filled with appointments, from haircuts to meetings with a real estate agent, indicating a forward-looking perspective on life. Contrastingly, Colby's messages uncovered during the gadget inspection revealed an ongoing flirtation with another woman, which persisted even while he was at the police station. Additionally, a search history retrieved from a laptop showed that Colby had been inquiring about life insurance payouts shortly before Kristen's death, adding a potential financial motive to the growing list of suspicious circumstances surrounding the case. The revelation about the insurance policies dramatically shifted the focus of the investigation. Despite Colby's previous denials, checks confirmed that 2 insurance policies were in place on Kristen's life, naming him as the beneficiary. These policies included one for military spouses and a standard life insurance policy, both of which promised substantial payouts upon her death. Contrary to his earlier claims, the total amounts were significant, and Colby had calculated precisely what he would receive. This financial motive intensified suspicions around him. However, the case initially hinged on the conclusions drawn by the forensic expert. The report noted that aside from the gunshot wound, there were no other signs of violence on Kristen's body. This was interpreted to suggest that she might have taken her own life, leading authorities to close the case and archive it. By then, Colby had already collected nearly $50,000 from the military spouse insurance and over $100,000 from the life insurance policy. With the insurance money secured, Colby indulged in a lavish lifestyle. He purchased a life-size doll, a new gaming console, an electric guitar, and high-end musical equipment. His expenditures didn't stop there. He splurged on clothing and entertained himself almost nightly at various bars and restaurants, seemingly convinced that he had evaded further scrutiny. Colby's newfound lifestyle continued unchecked for about 2 years until a significant shift occurred. In the summer of 2021, a new district prosecutor took office, prompting the detectives who had originally handled Kristen's case to seek a reevaluation of the evidence. They believed strongly that Colby was responsible for his wife's death and had staged it to look like a suicide. The detectives presented the case to the new prosecutor, emphasizing the inconsistencies and peculiar details, such as the restored browser history and Colby's questionable behavior following Kristen's death. Persuaded by their arguments and the clear motive, the prosecutor agreed to reopen the case. In July 2021, Colby was arrested and charged with first-degree premeditated homicide and intentionally misleading the investigation. Throughout the arrest process, he remained composed, quickly reaching out to his legal team for defense. His lawyers immediately began formulating a defense strategy based on the forensic pathologist's report, arguing that Kristen had long suffered from chronic depression and that her death was an inevitable tragedy. They portrayed Colby as a devoted husband despite the overwhelming evidence and suspicions to the contrary. The case took a critical turn when the prosecution decided to use an innovative method known as a psychological autopsy or psychological exhumation to delve into Kristen's mental state before her death. This approach involved extensive analysis by psychiatrists who examined data from Kristen's mobile phone, her social media activity, recent photographs, and interviews with her friends, relatives, and colleagues. The process was lengthy, taking several months, but it aimed to provide a deeper understanding of her psychological landscape at the time of her death. The findings from the psychological autopsy were unequivocal. Kristen had not intended to end her life. Evidence showed she had been actively making short-term and long-term plans, which contradicted the idea of a premeditated suicide. This pivotal report opened new avenues in the legal proceedings, which only began in September 2023, nearly 4 years after the tragedy. Colby, the defendant, had a clear motive, and his behavior during the investigation raised suspicions. His consistent lying and the dubious circumstances around the insurance policies he claimed Kristen handled. When pressed about the life insurance inquiries found on his computer, he faltered. Surveillance footage from Kristen's workplace confirmed she was at work when the queries were made, nullifying his claim that she might have made them. Further complicating his defense, when asked about the life-size doll and other lavish purchases he made shortly after Kristen's death, Colby claimed these were coping mechanisms to deal with his loneliness and grief. His explanations did little to sway the court, especially as his mother's fervent defense did not align with the behavioral profile presented by the psychiatrists. The psychological autopsy report crucially noted that the trajectory and angle of the bullet that killed Kristen did not support the theory that she had shot herself, particularly with her non-dominant hand. This detail was emphasized during the trial, where the jury was shown the weapon and the angle at which the bullet entered Kristen's chin, suggesting that someone else, positioned to her left, could have fired the shot. On November 20th, 2023, after considering all evidence and testimonies, the jury found Colby guilty on all counts, sentencing him to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for at least 50 years. Despite the conviction, Colby continued to maintain his innocence, and all his subsequent appeals were denied. One of the most baffling aspects of the case, however, was that despite the overwhelming evidence and the jury's verdict, the medical report's cause of death was never officially amended. This lingering oversight leaves a peculiar note in an otherwise resolved case. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more shocking and intriguing stories like this one.